Welcome everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I hope you're all well. Today I wanted to have a chat about the concept of prayer in faith, because we find that obviously in Islam Muslims pray 5 times a day. So I've been doing some research about the underlying explanation for this practice, and we find that it's not something new in the religious tradition. For instance, in Zoroastrianism, the practice of praying daily 5 times a day is common, as well as the ablutions or the washing ritual. When I looked into the Bible, I found several verses that refer to washing the hands and feet in entering the Holy Temple for Moses and Aaron, for instance. I'll put the reference at the bottom of the video just to make it easier. And we also find that David was facing a direction and praying 3 times a day. We find that the actions, the movements of the prayer, which are typical to the Islamic prayer, are also described in the Bible, which is really which is quite interesting. We find that the action of standing, bowing, kneeling, prostrating are not new concepts. So I will develop on those verses at the bottom of the video just to make it easier, so that you can have those references. So looking at this in depth, you find that the ritual of the daily prayers is found in the Hebrew tradition. The Jews pray usually 3 times a day or more. And also in the Christian tradition, there is this notion of praying the 3rd hour, the 6th hour, and the 9th hour. So, I mean, in the case of David, for instance, it says that he prayed 3 times a day. So this notion of daily prayers is found across the scriptures. And the movements of the prayer are found among the prophets and the anointed ones. So meaning that the Islamic prayer, which one would think that is typical to Islam, is not. The daily prayer is a common practice across the beliefs. And as I said, when we talk about religions, we always refer to the scriptures for information, for finding the right information. So we find that the scripture develop this concept by providing examples. And we see that in the practice of the prophets, the daily prayers, the facing of a direction, the movements of the prayer, whether it's standing, bowing, kneeling, or prostrating, are described in some of the verses. So it shows that Islam encompasses those practices. So in continuation of those scriptures. So I thought this would be an interesting point. In addition to that, when we think about Islam, it covers all aspects of human behavior, meaning that what would be the benefit of the daily prayers? Obviously, the benefits of a daily prayer would be the reminder of the spiritual purpose of the human being. And in addition to that, when you talk about collective prayers or prayers in congregation, the fact that those movements are part of the ritual means that there is synchronicity between the believers in collectiveness. It makes it easier when believers pray collectively, if there's a synchronicity in the movements. So that would explain, that would be one of the reasons that why we have those rituals. It goes in continuity with the prophetic tradition. It brings synchronicity and unity among the believers. From a physical point of view, obviously those movements are good for the body and the joints and general health in general, which is part of the Islamic tradition to cover all aspects of the human being. The mental aspect and the spiritual aspect are covered in the sense of when one prays, one is supposed to be concentrated in the state of mindfulness. So it has a meditative aspect that is covered in the prayer. Prayer is supposed to be a relief, a recharge, a spiritual recharge, I would say, and a time for connection. It's a communication with the Creator. So prayer is the time where the believer is communicating with the Lord. Obviously, the symbolic of the ablutions is the state of cleansing, of purification. So symbolically, the water ablutions cleanse the body and the mind of everything that takes one away from worship. So after this cleansing ritual, the believer is ready to enter this communication with God. So that's the idea behind it. So we find that the benefits of the daily prayer are many. It continues on the prophetic tradition which is found in the scriptures. So it is something that it was done. It's still done. I mean, you find that most believers pray some on daily basis, depending on their tradition and culture. So this is not a new tradition. That's my point. So the daily prayer is not a new tradition. The benefits of it is a reminder of the spiritual purpose of the humans. It has a spiritual benefit in the sense that it's a time for communication with God. It has a mental benefit. It's a time for mindfulness. The mind is concentrated. It has physical benefits. Obviously, it's good to take the time to do those movements for the physical well-being, and it has a unifying and, as I said, synchronizing aspect, because when we practice collective gathering and collective prayers, it just makes it easier. So I guess that's the idea behind it. So I thought it would be interesting to understand this, because I always think that when we practice the rituals, we need to have an understanding of the why we have those rituals. And the reason that why we have those rituals, it's because they are beneficial for the believers. So that's the idea. So in terms of timing, it's because it's linked to the it has a cosmic link. When you look at the Islamic religion, you find that the prayers are based on the sun movements, for instance. It doesn't mean that there is worship of the sun, not at all. It just means that there's a symbiosis between the humans and the cosmic earth. So you find that the Islamic calendar is based on the lunar movements, and the daily prayers, for instance, are based on the solar movements. It just shows there's a link, cosmic link between the humans and where they live, the earth and the cosmic environment. So that's the connection. So even in terms of symbolism, there is a symbolic connection between the humans and their environment. So I think that's the idea. Then the other aspects of it is as I said, the synchronicity, the unity of the believers. When in terms of collectiveness, when you do prayer in group, it's better if we're all doing the same actions. The fact that one may question the fact that one is repeating the same words, because obviously when you practice a ritual on a daily basis, it becomes a routine act, and then you lose this aspect of connection and mindfulness. So there is an effort, a striving in the prayer, in the sense that it has to be done consciously and felt emotionally, even if it's practiced on a daily basis. And this is, I think, the hard aspect, the hard bit, because how does one ensure that the prayer is meaningful? And because, as I say, it's not just a series of movements, it's a ritual based on movements which are found in the prophetic tradition. So it's the reiteration of the prophetic tradition and the scriptural texts. So that's for sure. But then one has to make the effort in order to be conscious and emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, in order to feel the impact of the prayer. So that's the theoretical aspect. I say in practice, it's not that easy, obviously, because if you do that on a daily basis and you have to repeat a certain set of wordings, you tend to enter into a routine. So the idea is to always maintain this striving, as I said, when one prays. Why would one repeat a certain set of wordings? So let me go into this as well. The first statement that the believer says when he prays or she prays is God is greater. So it's a reminder that faith and belief in God is more important than everything else that exists. So that's the reminder. So that's the idea. And we find that in the opening chapter of the Quran, the spirit of the divine communication is always, there is one aspect for praise of God, and the other aspect is about the believer, the believer's duty and the believer supplication and so on. So when you find that in the prayer, the wordings are directed towards the worship of God, because that's obviously the purpose of faith. Faith is to worship God. So you are reminded when you do this action of praying of that one is here to worship God, of that purpose. Then the other wordings that are found in the Islamic prayer, for instance, are referentials to the prophets and to the believers. So it's a confirmation. It's a confirmation of faith. So the Shahada, if you're familiar with it, is the testimony of faith is found in the prayer. The chapters of the Quran is found in the prayer. And salutations to the angels is found in the prayer. So there is many aspects of the unseen world which are found in the prayer, which is interesting, because it means that the prayer has a verbal connection. So the verbal connection is towards the Lord, because it says, God is greater. So it reminds the believer that God is greater, and there's praises, words of praise and glory for the Lord. And then in addition to that, you find scriptural text, scriptural verses. So there's a connection between the believer and the scriptures in the prayer. So I'm just going to summarize. So what's happening in the prayer? When one prays, there's a connection with God, reminding the believer that God is great. It's greater. So that's a reminder that the humans are here to worship God. Then the other aspect is the scriptural connection. There are specific words to be recited in the prayer, because there is a connection between faith and the scriptures. So scriptures are recited in the Quran, in the prayer, sorry. Then there is references to the prophets, because everything that is done in faith is a reiteration of what the prophets did previously, of what previous scriptures were teaching. So it's a reiteration of those scriptures. So there is a link with prophethood. Then you find in the Islamic prayer that there is a connection with the environment. As I said, the movements shows a connection with the earth by the prostration, act of prostrating. When one prostrates, you put the forehead on the earth. It's a direct connection between the earth and the human beings. And in addition to that, I said the fact that the prayer is set in alignment with more or less the sun movements. So there's a cosmic connection as well with the planet. With the planets, or the sun more specifically, without worshipping the sun, obviously. Let's make that clear. So there is this aspect as well. There's a reference to the prophets. So there's a link with the prophethood. There's a link with the scriptures. There's a link with God. There's a link with the cosmic. And what else is said in the scripture? Then there is salutations at the end. The prayer ends by salutating to the right and to the left. And it says in the prophetic tradition that this is to salute the angels. So we see there is reference to the unseen world, because when you look at faith, most of the belief is based on the unseen world. So the Muslim worship transcended God. They believe in angels, they believe in prophets, they believe in scriptures. So there is a very important aspect of the unseen. So there is a salutation to the right and to the left to those angels. I'm not sure why there will be the salutation to the right and left. One can think about this. But everything else is found, as I said, in the scripture. The standing, the bowing, the kneeling, and the prostrating is found in the scripture. So it's not something, as I say, it's not something new. It's a reiteration of the practice of the prophets. So I thought this would be an interesting point to ponder upon. So as we can see, there is wisdom and meaning behind those rituals. And I'll develop more in my next video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you soon.